Good afternoon and welcome to the Eton Bridge webinar lunchtime seminar session. Thank you all very much for joining us, and it's a great pleasure to see so many of our existing network here and also some new to our network, so thank you. My name's Louise Chaplin and I head up the board practice at Eton Bridge Partners. Before we kick off into proceedings, I was keen just to give you a little bit of oversight and market insight from an Eton Bridge perspective. And as most of you are aware, we are an interim search and consulting organisation providing talent solutions to both domestic and international organisations. We are functionally aligned to the market and sector agnostic. And actually what we've seen over the past couple of years is this sector agnosticity is really, really valuable in supporting our clients because we can give real insight in aligned sectors. As you know, we operate out of the UK base, but our international presence grows year upon year and supporting businesses across Europe, but now with a real focus on the Netherlands, and a number of our team work regularly out in Amsterdam. A little bit further afield, we continue to support our client network in the Middle East, with a hub being out of Dubai. From a market insight perspective and organisational threads, we've seen that organisations and individuals have been very careful in making the right choices. And I think from a career perspective, but also an organisational leadership perspective, it is even more important these days to make sure that you are making the right decision. And we're here to support that and challenge that from a recruitment perspective. We've taken, I think this is our 5th webinar this year, and as always, we're very keen to hear feedback. And one of the key feedback points has been across the last couple of webinars has been around questions. So please do, as you're going through the session, please do pop any questions you have into the Q&A box. I'll be monitoring it throughout. You will have a chance, we'll have a couple of poll questions as well to review during the session. But what I'd like to do now is to introduce my colleague Selina Faruqi, Associate Partner at Eton Bridge Partners in the reward practice, and also with a focus on her international network. Selina, welcome.
Thanks, Louise. Thanks everyone for joining. I'm really looking forward to the discussion this afternoon. The topic is at the forefront of all the discussions I'm having with our senior HR and reward network.
Thank you. Kirsty Bashforth is FTSE board member and Chief People and Culture Officer at Delaney. Kirsty, welcome and thank you very much for joining us.
Pleasure, good to be here.
And Patrick Bradley is the CPO at Brambles. Patrick, welcome and thank you very much for joining us.
Hi there, great to be on board, thank you.
Before we kick off, Kirsty, it'd be great just to get a sense from you in terms of insight as obviously current reward Remco chair at PZ Cussons. It'd be great just to get any initial insights from your side.
Right, thanks, Louise. So yeah, I'm the chair of Remco at PZ Cussons and also I'm a member of the Remco at Serco, two very different contexts really. For any of you who are Rem chairs, you will know the difference between a chair and a member. So it is a challenging role, but and call me a masochist, but I really enjoy it in a strange way because you are chairing a committee that is about the real decisions. You know, when it comes down to it, you're talking about the CEO and the CFO. I think you have to be both diplomatic, a bit resilient and good at problem solving, because you do have to find your way through and not everybody will be happy and most people are a little bit unhappy most of the time. There's a lot goes on behind the scenes rather than in the meetings, and there's quite a lot of terminology to get up to speed on, but try and simplify it as much as you can. I mean, for me at the moment, there are a couple of big themes that I'm faced with. One is that we're all faced with. How do you handle ESG inside the REM policy? Where, how much, what measures, etc. That's evolving. A second one would be with the ever increasing tight governance in the UK-based market. How do you handle that around competitivity? How do you can't keep everybody happy and lots of stakeholders have different views. So where do you actually find what you need to do? So there's quite a lot going on. And then specifically, final point from me right now is I'm right in the middle of a policy, where policy update, a 30-year policy. So we've done the policy, went out last week to my shareholders with, this is the final policy, thanks for consultation. And I'm right in the middle with dealing with those messages coming back and questions and qualified or unqualified support. So it's very live for me right now, the issues that are on people's minds.
Thank you. Patrick, from your side, from an exec perspective and supporting the board.
Yeah, sure. So I mean, my day job is Chief People Officer for Brambles. It's not a company which a lot of people in the UK have heard of. It's a well-known company in Australia where we're listed. And just to give people a bit of a sense of that, we've got 13,000 employees globally, and we're across 59 countries. So there's a very international dimension to the sort of elements of reward we're looking at. But I was previously Chief People Officer for EE, the telecommunications company before that, and I've spent my sort of life before that in reward roles, including doing the reward role at BT. So a long time sort of dealing with remuneration committees in various guises, and then sort of more recently, I've been working with a UK-based housing association on with their board called Raven Housing Trust, where I actually about 6 months ago took up the chair of the People and Rem Committee. So a sort of a mix of industries and a mix of sectors. And I think, probably my reflection on this year is it's probably one of the most unusual set of factors and variables around the sort of, theme of this webinar, the volatile pay markets, the sort of unusual set of economic conditions and sort of dealing with that and navigating that. Particularly tricky, I think, for people, and it's been a challenge for us, and in those two different organisations I work with at the moment, some very particular challenges based on how constrained your sort of envelope might be. But yeah, so I think that's been a theme that for us that we've been thinking about.
Thank you, Patrick. I think that takes us very nicely on to the poll questions that you all kindly completed as you registered for this event. So that was fantastic to get your insight. And the first question you completed was around top talent priority in the coming year. And I think the options were labour shortages and recruitment, supporting workforce in the cost of living crisis, building critical skills and competencies, executive talent succession, future of work, diversity, inclusion and culture. And the results were quite interesting, but the strong thread coming back was around building critical skills and competencies. So as a first point of discussion, Kirsty, it'd be great to get your insight from your perspective.
Yeah, it's a challenging world for us all right now, isn't it? Because with a number of things, whether it's the aftermath of COVID and how people are thinking about the workplace, whether it's ESG and that becoming core in business, not a sideline, but core. So are those skills out there and are they valued enough? Or whether it's AI and what skills we will need in the future. I think that topic of skills is a sort of a big melting pot at the moment. And there's a variation of people going, actually, I can't think about all of that. I'll just optimize the skills I have. Or everything's up in the air and I need to redefine completely what skills I need. So it's quite challenging, and therefore sometimes there are new emerging skills where, as a REM chair, I'm faced with a proposal from somebody that says there's no other person in the market. This is the person, we have to get them. You look at the benchmarks, you say, whoa, that's way over the top. But actually, it's such a vital role for the future of your skills base. So there's some really challenging conversations from a REM chair perspective of what is benchmarking today, alongside the can we find the skills in the first place and what skills do we need? So it's a real, it's really difficult and challenging. And I think it also comes down to, do you really know your business and where you really can add value? So a lot of stuff's going back to purpose, strategy, who are we, USP, having to make some big choices. So the whole piece about remuneration really ties into some of those big future strategic decisions, and the talent landscape is volatile, developing, and quite tricky actually at the moment.
Thank you. Patrick, from your perspective, what are you seeing from that? So that building is critical skills and competencies is aligned. And from a heritage perspective and Brambles, are you seeing differences from a global nature versus the UK?
Yeah, absolutely. And I was laughing when Kirsty was speaking, so I was, pitching those same things to our Remuneration Committee and chair over the course of this year around new skills. But look, I mean, I think that was a challenging list for people to pick from. Actually, I mean that's a whole set of things which are really hot at the moment. I mean, I personally would have answered that as building critical skills and competencies at the moment. I think it's very apt on us where we're trying to build out new businesses in digital, and I think like many organizations are around the world, and but I think this whole concept of sort of labor shortages in recruitment, shortages in workforce, cost of living, I mean that's a big thing. It's perhaps even more so in the UK in my portfolio than it is in a lot of other countries, because I think we're really in the midst of this strange mix of economic conditions where you've got the high inflation, high cost of living, high wage growth, but quite low growth, and then also on top of that quite low unemployment, which is a sort of, not an economist, but it is a sort of a strange mix of conditions, and shortages, particularly at the lower paid end of the workforce, I think has been a real issue and challenge in the UK, and I think is partly what's driving some of those factors really. And so I was surprised not to see that answered as one of the top issues, because I you can see that's still coming in time to come. But the other issues on there, like the future of work and this sort of remote hybrid working, I think this comes a little bit to how employees can respond, because flexibility is something which is super important to employees, and they really value from their companies that they work for. Actually, it's probably still not completely understood by a lot of businesses, I think, because of the way that people have perhaps acted post the pandemic on that topic. But so we haven't yet found an equilibrium on that topic, I don't think, across the UK economy. So I was surprised not to see that there as well. But anyway, I would have answered the same: critical skills and competencies, I think.
Great, thank you. And I think from an Eton Bridge perspective, what we found is fascinating is that, particularly since COVID and the return to sort of the balance of hybrid working, succession planning has been absolutely key, and we have been asked to do far more market maps of C-suite -1 and 2, and how do we look at succession and benchmarking from a compensation perspective than perhaps we did pre-pandemic. So organizations, it's very much on their radar from our perspective, but how do they find it, and who from a risk perspective wants to move, and what is the time frame? So very, very interesting insight. Thank you. The next question the participants kindly answered was around workforce salary increase, and the predominance came back around a 5 to 6% increase in FY23. Is that reflected from your side, Kirsty?
Yeah, it's not too far off from a UK point of view, absolutely. I mean, in various companies, you've had top-up payments, as well as various other creative solutions or support through the year, as well as the salary rise. So that's not too far off from what I'm seeing. Obviously, I'm chairing a REM committee, which is in various locations. So whether it's Indonesia or Nigeria, it's a very different inflationary environment. But where I'm involved, it's not too far off. There is the theme of, does this set the tone forever? I'm not sure it does yet, but we are seeing, and governance is a point I will no doubt be talking about for the rest of the webinar. We are seeing expectations around governance, of better alignment across the wider workforce, to make sure that wider workforce doesn't get left behind, even further bigger gap to the CEO and the CFO, by the expectations now being that the CEO rise should not just be aligned with the wider workforce, but should be behind the pace of the wider workforce. So we're seeing the governance landscape now starting to try and do a bit of that intervention as well, which makes the REM's job even more challenging because there's fewer places to go. But yeah, that's a number that I recognise.
Thank you. Patrick, from your perspective and Bramble's sort of viewpoint.
Yeah, I mean, I was probably expecting slightly higher than that. I mean, it's a sort of an eye-watering figure in many ways, based on, you know, the recent past and the recent history. But you know, for I think we, you know, in the UK, slightly more than that. I mean, if you look at the average earnings growth figures, the latest ones, they're a bit higher than that. They're a point or two higher than that as well. So you know, perhaps slightly higher. Will that be expected to continue? I mean, I agree with Kirsty. I don't think it's going to last forever, but I think we've still got some gas in the tank in terms of some of those levels of increases. I think partly because inflation's still a pressure, and you know, you see that falling much faster in the Eurozone or in the US or in other countries around the world than in the UK, where we still have a problem, I think. And you know, the Bank of England aren't forecasting that that's going to drop till 5 till the end of the year, and so I think increases at that level might continue for some time just because of the economic factors, although they won't be indefinite. But I think there's also a little bit of a sense of catch up in the workforce as well. You know, I mean, it's only recently that average earnings increases have really caught up with inflation, and only very recently sort of surpassed that. And so I think there will be a bit of a sense in the workforce of wanting to catch up in the workforce, and also in unions and social partners of wanting that kind of catch up. And you know, these kind of increases, they leave an imprint in what people expect as well. I think that's the other key point for me. You know, when you've had 2 years of very high historically increase to then go back to a sort of environment of 2 or 3% in one go, I think that's going to be challenging for you know, particularly for some of our sort of, you know, union partners and social partners, and so I think yes, it's going to go down, but I think there's a time lag with that. And you know, I agree with Kirsty about the exec rem levels. You know, we've seen them at high sort of CEO average increases compared to recent history, but it's still only, I think the average was 4% this year, so only roughly kind of half the average earnings growth. So I think that you know, will moderate at a lower level. Although that's quite tricky to explain, I think, to executive colleagues sometimes, when you know, you've spent sort of years saying, oh, well, you can't have increases ahead of the average sort of growth of the workforce, and now, well, actually you have to accept increases at half that level or lower than that level. I think it's tricky conversations, actually, because it feels like the goalposts have changed on that slightly, although I don't think it's wrong.
And no, it's fascinating. I think it brings us very nicely onto the last question that was asked, was around, do you expect your executive team's annual bonus to be higher or lower this year? And we gave everybody lots of options. 41% said no increase at all, and 43% said I don't know, with very low, you know, 1 or 2 percentile in the middle. Kirsty, your thoughts?
I think I'm not surprised by the I don't know, because the landscape changes so fast at the moment, and people are, you know, COVID had a long tail in so many ways that people are still working through or lapping through various issues. A lot of people are rethinking, you know, what does my strategy need to be? Has my marketplace so significantly changed that I need to rethink things? So setting your annual bonus, sitting as a REM chair, setting it becomes, it's not just one round, or it's often 3 rounds now, because by the time you've had the discussion, things have shifted. So it's quite challenging to set those effective ranges and targets. And through the year, so much is potentially shifting that I think more remuneration committees are going to be having more adjustment conversations through the middle of the year as something so much changed that we need to adjust, or well, actually, has there been a windfall or a massive headwind such that we need to do discretion upwards or downwards at the end of the year? So I think the I don't know is a true reflection of where we really are. And I think we need to be practical and pragmatic as remuneration committees and as executives to, it's not all set in stone a year ahead. That is challenging as well, because when you're trying to maintain incentivizing the top talent and you've got longer term plans that, you know, the incentives the goals you put in place 3 years ago look like prehistory now. I saw a question on the lists already talking about variable pay. I think it does make it quite, you've got to get more creative now. You've got to, I think, have a much closer set of conversations with your executives to make sure people are clear. Variable pay is variable pay, and the remuneration committee wants the execs and the company to do really well. It's not just about dinging, but things may change through the year. So I'm really not surprised about the I don't know, because I'm sitting here as a Rem chair. I don't know. You know, we're a good few months through the year. For example, the PZ Cousins one starts in the middle of the year. The financial year, and Circa, where I'm on, starts at the start of the year. So it's yeah, the I don't know is I was sort of expecting that.
Thank you. Patrick.
I mean, I don't think I can add much to that. I totally agree, and I think the fact that we've had such a volatile environment recently leads you to sort of say any prediction that you make probably will be wrong by the end of the year. So in many ways, not much point in making them up. But I think you know, for us as a business, we've done pretty well through the last few years. You know, we've had some strong years. So you know, I think probably overall we're looking at something similar. But again, I wouldn't particularly like to predict. And I think, you know, all of the factors that Kirsty references around the sort of exec rem environment, I would totally agree with.
Thank you. Good. So moving on, I think we're keen now to get our participant insight, and I'll hand over to Selina now, please, for the poll questions.
Thanks, Louise. So our first question: should Remco shift their focus away from votes and place greater emphasis on motivating and involving executive talent? Well, the votes are in, and it's a fascinating one. Kirsty, what are your thoughts?
Oh, if only it was so simple. That's my first thought. Wouldn't that be lovely? Yes, I don't care about the vote. We'll just do exactly what's right. I think that's one of the challenges for the Remco is you have a number of stakeholders to manage, and that's what your role is. I mean, you go into that, and that's your job. There's not particularly an amount of upside where everybody is leaping around and patting you on the back saying, what an amazing job you've done as a Rem chair. Never, because people will never go, wow, brilliant Rem policy, everybody. But it is, I think what's happening, what I've observed is, and I'm living through this right now, the governance in the UK listed environment has become quite so all-encompassing. Almost every little thing is getting, oh, we'll plug that gap, plug that, plug. It's getting quite complicated. And you have investors who are getting clearer and clearer on their own positions of what they will and will not vote for. And that doesn't necessarily line up. So you have an investor community that maybe in your top 10 and may have different things that they want you to go for, and they may be contradicting. At the same time, you have top talent you want to motivate and maintain if they're doing a great job. And you have employees who are also shareholders who sometimes, it's so complex, some of this stuff. And you have your customers, etc. And you have the media. So to ignore the voting of your investors at your peril, because there is governance around what happens when the vote goes against you. But what I do see is, I think Rem chairs are beginning to get more comfortable with not expecting such a high vote, because it's almost impossible. And when there's so many rules and there's so little room to maneuver, you find almost more resilience as a REM chair to say, right, as long as I've been really transparent with them and I really understand the implications and I've really worked hard with them, actually we need to find the right answer that we believe is our judgment for this company in the round. And I've sort of in that situation as well going, this feels a bit risky from a voting perspective, but you have to do the right thing, because otherwise you're just going to be an algorithm trying to find the right way through, and you won't be keeping everybody happy, and you're probably going to lose your top executives. So it's a really, really tricky balance. I'd love to not worry so much about the votes, but that is the role. You are trying to deliver a policy that is appropriate for all stakeholders. So I think the biggest thing you'll see is more votes, more AGM votes that are less than 80% maybe. You know, there'll be more REM chairs saying I can live with 50.1.
Okay, interesting. Thanks, Kirsty. Patrick?
Well, I mean, look, you might expect me to disagree with what Kirsty said, being a chief people officer, and it's certainly on the one hand, I've definitely made those arguments to various REM committees over the years. But look, you know, I think being a public listed Remco chair is a very difficult balancing job, you know, and I think at the end of the day, the votes are made by the people who own the business, and so you have to listen to the people who own the business. It's their money. It's not ours as a company. And you know, I think the more pressure to balance the whole sort of social public policy concerns around pay, investor perception, the sort of PR of the company if things go wrong, and you know, balancing that with incentivizing and motivating leadership teams is a tough set of scales to have to balance. And you know, I think there's just such heightened awareness around this topic and heightened sensitivity around this topic. I mean, there is a wider question about, does all of that threaten our ability to keep talent, senior exec talent in UK listed, especially visible UK listed businesses? And you know, I don't think probably it is a concern. I mean, I don't think it's quite a concern as everyone's making out. But you know, I mean, if you really want to maximize your remuneration as a senior executive, go and work in America or go and work for a private equity company. I mean, that's the thing. Having said that, there's lots of other great things about you know, being a senior executive in a listed company, which aren't necessarily about pay, which are great. So look, I think, you know, generally, you know, Remco's chairs have to balance that, you know, and so I don't think it's you know, quite a fair response to have 80% of people saying, you know, that they need to do that. But you know, just a sort of parting shot, I do agree with Kirsty again about the level of votes, but you know, we are still averaging 95% plus in terms of the FTSE 100 around votes on the reports and policies. So perhaps there is a margin to take a little bit more risk and have a bit of more creativity if it's for the good of the business and the good of shareholders ultimately. But yeah, difficult balancing act.
Can I just build something on something that Patrick said there? I'm normally quite diplomatic on webinars, but on this one, I'm also going to build on your view, Patrick. I do think the governance has got so complex now. It's a bit like an overblown tax system. It's tweaks and tweaks and tweaks. It is stifling. And I'm sure there's probably some nods from participants going, it is stifling, it's exhausting. First of all, trying to learn it all. Secondly, trying to keep up with the number of consultations. Thirdly, knowing when those are going to get done or not and put in place. And fourthly, just the complexity of it all now. The boundary is getting smaller and smaller and smaller of what space you've got. And as I say, we're sort of in danger of really just needing an algorithm to find the right way through. You know, put your shareholders in with their list of what they need, put your company in and press a button and out pop will be your ideal REM policy, because there is very little place to maneuver. I would love to see a sort of scrapping of it, right, and go, okay, what is the governance for UK around corporate governance around remuneration trying to achieve? And let's write a 2-pager and start again. That would be my wish list, almost even way above, should I be spending more time, trying to make sure the vote is right. So I'd almost, that would be my ideal scenario. My nirvana would be, let's start again, because we've got it. It's so complex now that you just can't keep up with it. It's like a minefield.
Yeah, complex, and so many competing priorities as well that aren't necessarily the same in every country in the world that you operate, and it makes it super hard. And I agree.
Yeah, and it doesn't help us being able to attract talent into listed companies in the FTSE, because people will go, oh, I can't really work out what I'm going to get, and I'm not going to get anything for this many years. And even then, it's got so many complex bits to it. Yeah, it's my 2 pence.
Absolutely. Thanks, Kirsty, and thanks, Patrick. We've touched on this topic already regarding seeing an average of 5 to 6% salary increase for the year 2023. We're keen to put the question back out to the participants again, just to get a view of, do we think that's going to continue considering the current cost of living crisis? It's interestingly balanced, and Kirsty and Patrick have already touched on this through the conversation, but over to Kirsty. What are your thoughts?
I think, it depends, doesn't it, whether you are more focused in the UK or whether you're a UK-based business that has an international footprint, which I think many people do in the FTSE, actually. It's a much more internationally footprinted stock exchange than many others. So I think in that answer is probably a number of people saying, well, it may be similar-ish in the UK, but actually in the US or Germany, it might be quite different. Again, I think it's too difficult to say yet. And also there are so many ranges within that, aren't there? There are, that might be the average, but people I know in companies are looking way more at ranges now and giving themselves an upside pot and a downside pot, so that they've got some flexibility, because on the margins, there are still people who either need to get up to a benchmark or actually are just doing a much bigger job than they are being rated at the moment. So, and similarly, there's some others who, in performance just aren't moving up and therefore shouldn't get as much. So I think that's maybe what that is reflected in that answer. Absolutely.
Thank you, Kirsty. Patrick, your thoughts?
Yeah, I gave my thoughts on this earlier. I think, whereas I think, it will go down, but I think it will take some time, and I think there will be some lag factors. And I think there's just this imprint in people's minds about getting used to this sort of level of increase that is going to take some time to move away from. But I think we're already seeing that outside of the UK. Again, I agree with Kirsty. This is particularly a UK issue, this persistent sort of cost of living problem. I think in a lot of the major economies we're further through that, but yeah, I think it will, but it will take a little bit of time.
Thank you.
Great, thank you, Selina. That's fantastic to get the insight from you listening. We've had some fantastic questions coming in, and keen just to touch on a couple of threads of topics and build on that. First one is around salary benchmarking, and it's a common theme that we have across our practices at Eton Bridge, but is the data out of touch with reality? And I think, firstly, from an Eton Bridge, and thinking about my partner colleagues within Eton Bridge, we have that challenge when we're taking on assignments with organisations, and sometimes I see functional threads around if it's within HR, if it's within finance, if it's within digital technology. Kirsty touched on it earlier around, niche roles requiring, create real sort of value in the market and come at a premium. So I think it can be sometimes functionally dependent, but I'd be keen to get your view, Kirsty.
Yeah, I think benchmarking is, I see two things here. One, pick your benchmarks and be really clear what you're looking at. I'll go into that in a second. And the second one is, what are people looking for more comfort for benchmarks because they're worried that they're going to get done if they don't have the right benchmark, or are they trying to look for the benchmark to prove that their decision is right? So there's a motivation of what is everybody doing benchmarking for, because sometimes you just have to use your judgment. Secondly, back to the first point around what benchmarks are you picking? I think for every role you're looking at, you should think about a scale of the role, you should look at complexity of the role and experience in the role. So it's never just bing, that's the number because that's the job. Again, there's nuance. It's not art, it's not science, it's a craft. I think there's also, it's always worth a discussion about what is the benchmark that you're looking at. Is it a FTSE 100 or a FTSE 250? Is it all share? Is it a particular industry? Is it companies that are structured like you? Is it companies that are in a similar maturity or background? So having a real conversation about what you are trying to benchmark. So it is a bit of a matrix, and I don't think it's an exact science, and it's not just a pick a number out of the air art, but it is becoming more crafty, I think, and more of a bespoke situation. But it will never give you total precision. It will never, and it should never give you total precision. I use benchmarking as another data point, as a way to show that actually I've looked into it, but it's not going to give me my answer, because you've got to use, it's not going to give me all of my answer, and it's not a place where I can go, yes, but my benchmarking said. You've got to put a number of things in the round, but I think it's getting more crafty as we go along.
Brilliant, thank you. Patrick, your thoughts?
I mean, I think in a context of exec remuneration, it's a lot easier, isn't it? Because these figures and the remuneration, they're all disclosed, and you can see it, and there's some good companies who just put that all together for you, and it's quite simple. But I think when applied to the wider employee base, I think approach to benchmarking over the last sort of couple of years has been really challenged, because essentially benchmarking is a lagging indicator. It's something which is collected at a point in time. It based on surveys that were submitted by people even longer ago, and so you're sort of always out of date, and it's a lagging indicator. And in the sort of pace of change that we've seen in recent years, it hasn't kept pace. And I think that a lot of the commercially available benchmarkings have been out of date quite quickly. And so I think this is where I really agree with Kirsty's point. You shouldn't be a slave to your benchmarking. You should set and establish your own pay ranges really around what you want to pay as a business, and benchmarking is one input into that. But I think organizations have had to look at a wider range of factors. If you're losing people really quickly and really rapidly in one particular skill set or skill type, your benchmark may well be wrong, and so you have to adapt to other indicators and other factors. That's not just about a pure sort of interpretation of the benchmark. But I think it has been challenged, and particularly in high inflation economies, we've observed that for years. It's just now that the mainstream has been to be high inflation economies, and so I think that always have to remember it's a lagging indicator, I think.
Great point.
Thank you. Hopping back to variable pay, and we did touch on this, and there's been a really interesting question in from one of our Remco chair network. So thank you, Maria, on this. And thinking about things being so volatile in recent years, it's tricky to get long-term incentive plans to actually pay out. So how does that work in terms of attracting talent? But what other measures can we put in place really to help on that variable pay space? Thoughts, Kirsty?
So I'm with you, Maria. It is difficult because also, I know this sounds very selfish, but from a committee chair and member point of view, the amount of time you're spending trying to get those right things for the next 3 years out, and they don't, it's 3 + 2 + whatever. It's like a whole industry in itself. So I think we all need to be up for exploring different options as well. That doesn't mean it always works. For some, it doesn't work. And you're seeing across the FTSE, you're seeing some go more towards restricted share plans or value creation plans, and some are going back to the more performance share plans. So I think it is horses for courses, but I think we should all, as REM chairs, be up for exploring those different options. And I would always look at a package in the round. So it's not just, well, the long term's not paying out, so we need to do something about it. I would say, what's the balance? Where's the company? And again, comes back to the craft and no precision. But I'd be up for looking at that because it increasingly, if you are a CEO and a CFO, it is becoming an even higher pressured, higher expected role with way more media scrutiny, justified or not justified, whatever. And if we don't line up those incentives really right, I'm not saying you just pay a CEO and a CFO because they're great and you need to keep them. You've got to work out what talent you need. But I think as REM chairs, we need to think about our talent, and we need to really understand the job we're asking them to do, how long we need them to be incentivized and stay around, and try and find the right appropriate measure to put in place or structure to put in place that will keep that in the round. What are we doing short term? What are we doing long term? And I also saw there's a question there about comply or explain up there. And I think often as REM committees, we are a bit nervous when we see comply or explain. We therefore automatically comply. Actually, it says comply or explain. So we are given in the governance articles, we are given the freedom, the space to explain. But because it says comply or explain, we often go down to it's just safer to comply. So I think we need to look to ourselves and really get clear on that. And if we are going to not comply, but just explain, then we need to be really transparent and put those decisions in the round. This feels like a bit of a therapy session for me at the moment, because I'm right in the middle of explaining a lot to a lot of people at the moment, and trying to be as transparent as I possibly can. This is why we're doing this. This is the balance. These are the elements that come together. This is why. This is how we'll make decisions. Because I think too often things are based on perception. And the more transparent we can be about the decisions we're taking, the more people will go, well, actually, it may not be quite within the governance articles, but I can see why they're doing it, and now it makes sense. Otherwise, in any shareholders, the compliance team will just go tick, cross, tick, cross, tick, cross, while the fund manager may be going, I love this company. So it's beholden on us to explain what we're doing, explore all the structures we can, and be really thoughtful in the round. Long answer, apologies.
Thank you. Patrick.
Yeah, I mean, this sort of thinking about the original question, I mean, you do, for senior executives, there is a real value to setting schemes that are over a period of time. These roles are strategic in nature, and they should have impact on the business over a period of time. And so you want to be able to see that. But, going back to some of the previous answers about, well, we can't really predict what's going to happen for the remainder of this year. When you're predicting what's going to happen and setting targets over a 3-year scheme, that is really hard, and you can end up looking back and thinking, well, what were we thinking when we agreed to set those targets, either for the good or for the bad? And I think obviously one of the ways that try and get around that is with metrics like TSR, which is about relative performance, and should sort of absorb some of the shock of some of the events by it being about relative performance. But they can often be as influenced by what was happening when you started the TSR rather than when you end it. So it can also feel a little bit like a lottery sometimes. So it's hard to know what the answer is. I mean, I like personally the remuneration structures that they have in the US a bit more, where you have a bit of a mixture of different components often in your LTI. So you have a mixture of RSUs, of performance shares, and of options that kind of put together something which, you know, executives seem to find more valuable and more reliable, I think. But, you know, that's not particularly a strong option in the UK or even Australia, where we're listed, where they don't seem to be very popular or very well supported. But I mean, that's my preference, I think, for dealing with these issues, because I think it is a real issue, because we had some great research done by one of our REM consultants in Australia that said, you know, the average executive values a pound of LTI at about 25% of a pound of fixed REM, which is a lot of cost and investment for not really delivering great output and impact, you know. So, you know, yes, investors love them because they incentivize this longer term performance, but is it really delivering that value for executives? But yeah, I mean, the US model would be where I'd go, but I don't think that that's terribly realistic in the UK listed environment.
Great, thank you. Another question that's popped up around EU is, Victoria May, thank you. What impact do you foresee the EU Transparency Directive having on the remuneration policies moving forward?
Refer to the EU policy expert. What do I see? I think this is more an alignment question, because if you're a listed company in the UK with a lot of continental European operations, you've probably been overdoing the governance compared to there already. So there's a lot of an alignment to come up. I was working until the start of this year in a Swedish-based company, and so I was getting quite up to speed with all of this. And I do think what I saw was that the UK had a heavier governance agenda in any case. And so it wasn't about catch up. Some of it was going further ahead, and some of it is going down to smaller level companies from the EU than the UK. But it wasn't going to be radically divergent. You know, this has been consulted on for so many years. I mean, I think how pay and decisions are made in continental Europe is very different in terms of boards and supervisory councils and works councils, etc. So I think it'll be, again, horses for courses and local. But I think this is more of an alignment question and a how deep into the scale of companies it goes, more than it is a sort of, oh my goodness, we've got to do two different things.
Thank you. Patrick.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a big topic, really. I mean, and I think this is not just the EU. I mean, in the US, pay transparency regulations, which is not perhaps where you'd expect it to be pioneered from, but you know, they're already live, and you know what you have to put out there when you're recruiting people is very different, you know, to how it used to be. So I think I do feel as well the sort of developments in the EU in this space will probably have some bleed over to the UK corporate governance environment, and will influence somewhat the direction. So, you know, I think for me, it's just starting to think about that and prepare for that, and saying, well, if I had to disclose this now, you know, how would I explain it? What would I try and change in the intervening period? What should I try and push and influence in the sort of direction of how we're paying people? And, you know, as a remuneration committee chair, probably, you know, generally, you know, Remcos have a, you know, are focused on exec rem, but have this, you know, obligation to sort of look at the general reward structures in an organization as well. So I would be starting to ask a few questions and saying, you know, what's your plans? How do you think this will impact you? What are you beginning to think about and do? Because I do think it will have a bleed over into the UK structures, and it's already seeing that in other economies.
It's interesting, actually, Patrick, you talk about workforce alignment. One of the things I try to do in each REM committee is that we have a wider workforce dashboard, so that we've got almost a chart that says, well, this is what the official exec REM policy is. Where are the structures? How far do they go in the organization? What are those structures? all the way down to, you know, the engagement, the values, etc. And how does that, what's that one picture, so that we've got a check ahead of where might our misalignment, you know, red flashing lights potentially be. And as you say, it's not that as a Remco we have the authority to say you must change that pay structure in that part of the business, but at least we can oversee and assure our shareholders that actually, and the governance, that we can see a path all the way through, that we're doing the best to alignment, and we're overseeing it and asking the execs to do it. It's a really good point. It's a dashboard I have in the papers all the time that may look redundant half the time, but actually is a really important check and balance. And yeah, to your point about the EU pieces and any governance in a different country, we should always be looking ahead as to what's coming down the line, and report as if, and try and report and work towards reporting as if it was already in place. Otherwise it comes up and smacks us in the face.
Thank you. And one just final topic for discussion, because it's been really interesting. We've actually spent the last 50 minutes talking about the future rather than actually reminiscing too much on the past. If we were to cast our minds forward 3 years, where do you think we will be? And Kirsty, you highlighted around ESG being one of the key drivers. What would you think the challenges might be from a Remco chair perspective, and that balance of reward within a UK PLC, if we're being specific?
So off the top of my head, I might imagine executives would be, and remuneration committees would be, discussing a rounder package. So the package may include more about well-being and environment. When I say environment, working environment, not just, I don't mean environment out there. So it might be a rounder package of more varietal options as a discussion point. You know, what do people really value? To Patrick's point about the, you know, the value of firm REM versus the long-term REM, but it might be the value of medical benefits. It might be the value of investment in my own wider well-being. I think that's one element. I would hope we have a simpler governance environment, at least coming down the line, and that we have restated clarity on what we're really trying to do with governance. I would, what else would I love? I would love, this is a personal wish list, in 3 years' time, I would love the shareholders to, whenever we engage with them, both the compliance and the fund manager to turn up. So that would be a real wish list. I'd love investors to have those two departments really close together so we can have great conversation. And I do think in 3 years' time, we'll have got much more mature as companies on where and how do we put ESG into remuneration, what measures, what's appropriate, but more to the point, what's right for the company in ES and G. Because some companies, it may be big E, small s and G. For some, it may be big G, big S, small e. And I think the clearer the more mature all companies can get around what does ESG mean to me and how do I deliver into it really well to create more value for my shareholders, I think the more equipped and smarter Remcos will be on finding where those ESG metrics should be.
Thank you. Patrick.
And that's a really hard question. I'm glad you came to Kirsty first on that one, give me a chance to have a little bit of a think about it. But look, I would definitely agree with the simpler environment. If we can have more simplicity, I think it you know, even if it's still as strict, to have that more simplicity, I think gives people a bit more clarity about where the boundaries are and what to shoot for. And I think it helps you design structures within that. And then I do agree on the ESG point. I mean, actually in our scheme, we put ESG modifiers for the first time this year for our senior executives. And I really do think, I mean, we're a very, sustainability is extremely high up our agenda anyway, but I do think this, through investors, has a power to really make a difference in this spot, and we need to make a difference, you know, so I really hope that this is where extra regulation and extra sort of things can actually make a real positive difference on on this area. I really hope that that's the case, but you also feel a sort of backlash against some of these metrics coming from the US and from other environments around the world. So I hope it's a trend that continues, and because I think it could be a huge force for good, because we need to make a difference, particularly on the E of ESG.
Great, thank you. And just before we wrap up, and just looking at the attendance levels, and I'm delighted to say with my simple maths, I've worked off of we've had about a 3% drop off throughout the hour. So thank you all very much for your positive attendance and your interaction with the poll. We really appreciate it. Any final insights from you, Kirsty, that you'd like to share?
Yeah, I just thought I've got 4 points just to share from being what I've learned as a REM chair, and I'm still learning and will always be learning. If you are a REM chair, make sure you've got the dream team of your excellent reward person inside the company, your really trusted REM consultant who will give you a view and not 35 pages of font 2 numbers, but give you a view and understand how to share the messages, and a really strong relationship with the chief people officer or chief HR officer, because the 3 of them plus you, that's the team that will really get stuff done. And as a REM chair, if those 3, if you don't have those, or you can't work with them, or they can't work with you, it can be a bit of a mess. So that's the first thing, get that team in place. The second thing is always speak to the CEO before the Remco. Even if you think it's not controversial, it's really important that the CEO feels that the Remco chair is not doing something separate, or there isn't misperception. No matter the difficult conversation, no matter whether it's an easy conversation, always check in with the CEO before the Remco so that you know what's on their minds. Third thing out of 4, don't worry, almost done, is to, as a REM chair, really get clear on the strategy of the company so that you have got it at the top of your mind, because you need to know, is the REM policy I am operating towards aligning to help deliver that strategy, or is it sitting in its own stratosphere? Because if it's sitting in its own stratosphere, that's not good. And fourthly, really think hard, because I struggle with this sometimes. Try and find the split between, is everybody happy or miserable on the content of the decisions versus am I chairing it okay? Because you may be a brilliant REM chair with lots of miserable people because the conversations are controversial. That doesn't mean you're an awful REM chair. Similarly, just because everybody's happy with the numbers doesn't mean you're a great REM chair. So really try and split those 2 things out. And it's quite difficult, and try and get feedback on it. Because you're always one side of the line. But if you can keep flipping either side of it and know that over time you're going down the middle, you're doing all right.
Brilliant. Thank you, Kirsty. Patrick, final word from you.
Yeah, I mean, just some very different ones, really, actually. I mean, I think the focus of this has been very much about pay and about financial reward. But actually, I think it must be really difficult if you're in a company at the moment that cannot afford or that don't have the provision for that increases. And I think, my experience has been that's important, the sort of financial side, but actually are people working for a company that they feel has a strong purpose, has a strong value, has wider, utility in society, and how you can sort of make that link for your employees. As well as things like flexibility, those kind of topics as well, I think are so important for employees. So I don't think sort of all is lost if you're in a company in that kind of category. And I think every company should be thinking about those things, even if they are able to sort of keep pace with the reward environment. It's just not all about pay and financial rewards, in my experience of doing the jobs that I've done.
Great, thank you. Kirsty, Patrick, thank you very much indeed for your insight. Selina, thank you. It's been great working with you this, and a thank you also to the Eton Bridge marketing and tech team behind the scenes, keeping us all on the right track. Until the next lunchtime webinar, thank you very much for your attendance, and do keep in touch. Thank you.